Hello, everybody. I'm David Frangioni, CEO of Modern Drummer, and welcome to another episode of our Modern Drummer podcast. We are in the venue. You're always catching us somewhere backstage, on stage, on the bus, wherever. We'll do these podcasts because we want to bring the greatest drummers in the world to you. And today we have none other than Joey Castillo.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing great, man. Good to see you.
You
Thank you
too.
for joining us.
Thanks for having
So
me.
we're live from the venue in Fort Lauderdale. So Joey, let's go back to the beginning. You're such a passionate drummer, and you've had a career filled with so many great highs, milestones, great gigs, right up till tonight, the show you're playing. But let's start at the beginning, when you found the drums and you fell in love with them and your journey began. When was that and where was that? And how did it happen?
Well, let's see. From what my parents have always told me as a young, when I was really young, I mean, and I can remember as well. I loved music. You know what I mean? There was always music in the house. My parents had, the typical stereo and
They
vinyl.
weren't musicians, but they
None.
had music. They just loved
Nobody in
music.
my family comes from any kind of, musicianship at all.
Okay.
So, uh, with that said, it was for them, like they said, it was like they could always remember me, doing that typical just banging all day and on the tables and in school too. I always remember as well, being told to stop banging. But yeah, so I was more, I think, I just loved music, and like I said, my parents had a pretty good musical taste, and they kind of was all over the place for the most. But I didn't start playing drums. I started kind of late because a friend of mine had a drum set.
Okay.
I kind of started playing that way, just messing around. And I remember when, like I said, I've told this before. I remember his mom distinctly walking out with the first day he had a drum set, and she asked me if I played, and I was like, no. It's like I don't play. I've never played the drums. She was like, "Why? You sound like you know how to play." And I was just doing the typical. I got behind it, and rhythmically, I kind of
They're
really knew.
tremendously natural.
Yeah, and kind of like,
And how old are you at this point?
I'm gonna say it was probably about 13,
Okay.
12, 13. But I didn't really start playing till I was about 15, so, but I was a typical kid where I just, sat and listened to records and played to records. That was the only way to
Sure.
do it back then,
Sure.
I had a couple friends who played, get in the garage and mess around with them, and,
You're in LA at this point.
yeah,
You grew up.
this is in Gardena where I grew up.
Okay.
I grew up in the South Bay.
And you're still playing your friend's drum kit.
Pretty much. Well,
Good.
my first friend, it was funny enough, my first friend who that situation took place with, he moved over the summer. And then there were no drums in sight for a good year or so,
Okay.
And then another friend of mine's brother played. And I remember he was like, "Hey, you can borrow these drums." And I remember I took him home, own Sparkle kit,
Awesome.
messed around on it, and it didn't last very long because it wasn't in very good shape. But then that I immediately fell in love. I knew I wanted to play the drums. I didn't know how.
Wow. But it was that immediate and
It was
natural.
that
It was a
immediate.
calling.
Yeah,
Really.
it really was because I didn't think about anything but the drums at that point. It was like they were constantly just in my brain. Like thinking of what I could do when I got home out of school. I was going to the garage and just mess around with the drums.
Right.
So my grandmother actually at one point knew that I fell in love with the drums, and she loaned me some money to buy this first kit that I had,
Wow.
which was,
That's a pivotal turning point.
well, it was because it was, and mind you, it was probably one of the cheapest drum sets around. I used to walk home from school in this little pawn shop every day, and it was just this gray, like, old. It was even before the CB700, so it was more like those Royce kind of style
Okay.
things.
Sure. Sure. But it was a drum kit. And
So,
you had
it
your
was a
heart
little
pounding
kit,
every
yeah.
time you saw that kit.
Yeah, and I think from what I can remember, I might be wrong. Can't remember the exact part, but I think it was like $175 or $200. My grandmother loaned me the money.
Amazing.
I got it. Got a paper out. Paid her back. As soon as I paid her back, I put the paper out and then just started playing.
Amazing.
And it was another one of these things where kit didn't last that long, but it was like I loved it and it worked, and that's what I started on, and that's what I just kept going on. And
No lessons at this point.
No,
right? You're
no, I
playing the
never taken
records.
lessons.
Okay,
No,
so totally self-taught
totally self-taught.
and just listening to the music and just
Yeah,
playing to
listening to
it.
music and album covers, magazines, seeing what drummers were using, how they used them, it was like that kind of thing for me. That's why all that kind of stuff, like modern drummer and all this it was so important
Sure.
to the foundation of my beginnings, and like many others, obvious. It's
It
like
was informing a lot of, you know, ideas and possibilities that otherwise there would be no access to.
without a doubt, without a doubt, it was like it showed me, if it wasn't like I say, the inside of a record cover or something, you know, um, magazines and these types of things showed me even how to just set up a drum set for the most,
Right.
emulating others and figuring out what
And who was inspiring you at this point now, your
early.
first drum idols?
Well, so when I was first getting started, the typical, it would be Bonham, it would be, Bill Ward was huge, Bunny Carlos, I loved Bunny. Um, Obviously Buddy Rich, for me at that time, it was discovering a lot of players as well.
Sure.
So I was really starting to get into music. It was that moment which, we all kind of you fall into that thing where every record becomes interest, whether you like it or not. I'm gonna listen to
Because
it.
it's new.
Yeah. Or I like the cover, or a friend of mine said you should listen to this. It was just like so the information was coming in, and I was taking it all in. I was listening to it all and checking it all out. So all those drummers were the obvious, at
Sure.
that point for I think most drummers coming up, Um,
And then how does this progress to the point where now you get with your first real band and now your
well, that
career is
okay,
starting?
yeah. So my thing was I started messing around with local friends and stuff, playing covers like everybody else in the garage and learning, some trying to, learn a Zeppelin song, and then, a Sabbath song, and,
Yeah.
a UFO song or something, and then I started to really get into like punk rock and new wave and stuff like that. So I started discovering other players and other types of drummers. And, you know, at that point in my life, I think that where it started to really kind of like, I started to open up to a lot of people, obviously Stuart Copeland, Topper Headon of The Clash was, all those kind of guys. I was like discovering all these players, and seeing how everybody had this really kind of different approach and these different sounds, it was starting to
Yeah.
really open up to a world type thing, sound and stuff.
You start to discover the nuances
Of
too,
course.
right? When you listen to Stuart Copeland, there's so many, all of a sudden what he's doing with the hi-hats and the
Yeah.
reggae
And,
influence,
and it's
it
like,
kind of turns your head like,
that's what it
what
was for me.
what is this?
Stewart was really somebody who I know, and Topper from The Clash. It was like those guys, they didn't just listen to rock. And I started to go like, oh, that's their approach is so much different. So I started to dig into what they were listening to. And, it was like whether it was Fila and whether it was, all this African type stuff or Middle Eastern type stuff, and reggae and everything else. So, I started to do a little more investigating, and, you open up. You open up, that and you get turned on to all these different kind of sounds as well,
Mhm.
you know? It just it weirdly turned into a more of a, uh, I don't wanna say a compacted sound, but the sounds were changing, you know what I mean? It wasn't the big rock thing anymore,
Right.
so to speak, only.
Right.
It's like, "Oh, wow," Stewart had this crank and snare, and it was like, it was like the toms really were musical, and his approach to cymbals were completely different than most people,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, his playing of them, um so that was a big part of my, I think, growth. And then I started to kind of really get into, like I say, punk rock, and I discovered the Stooges, and then I discovered like the kind of less is more thing in a way. And then it was like, it just was kind of all over the place, and that's what I embrace. And that's what I really felt most comfortable with. It was kind of, you know, messing around with a lot of
Well, you were
different
open
things.
to all of these different styles. It sounds like you were in that phase where, as drummers, we go through it, we cycle around through it because we get busy actually playing a lot too
Sure.
as we get older. But in these phases, the one you're referring to, you're a sponge
That's
and
right.
you're just open to all. It's like a stew that all these different ingredients just kept being put into,
A hundred
and
percent.
it's like, what is this gonna become, you're not entirely sure, but the journey is so exciting
Of course,
because these are all new concepts.
yeah, and it's funny because that's how I ended up seeing Buddy play. You know, a couple friends of mine, a couple older buddies of mine that I was growing up with, we were all kind of all drummers, funny enough. Um, we used to go see Buddy Rich at Disneyland. You know, he used to play at the
Okay.
Coronation
Right,
Garden,
right,
and it was
right.
like I met him, you know, and got him to sign a drum head when I was a kid, and he was just, you know, it was, you know, at that point too, I must have been, I guess about 16, 16, 17 maybe.
And it's so
And
mind-blowing
it
because, like,
and
when
that's
do you
just
ever I saw Buddy perform, I was blessed enough to be
yeah,
old enough, I guess you could say, that I
yeah,
saw him actually perform in person multiple times,
yeah.
and it's you can't even describe
And
it.
that's the thing. That's what I tell people. I'm like, you know, because it's funny because there's still a lot of people that just have only ever seen him on, you know, YouTube or something or a video of something. And you know, there's still the pros and the cons and the naysayers and this, that. But I'm going like, you know, there's something about Buddy that it's absolutely indescribable. I could not even start to even get into what it was like to be there.
Yeah, it's true.
Because the funny thing was it just real quick a story. When we went to see him at one point at Disney, you know, we were watching from the front, the little tiny garden there in Disneyland where he used to play. He used to do a couple sets a night. So the second set that he did, you know, being the age we were, we hopped the fence where he was set up in the corners. So you know, there was like the little mesh kind of garden fence behind him because we wanted to sit behind him, and we did. And it was unbelievable what his feet were doing and what his hands were doing
Oh
from
my
behind.
god.
It was just like, again, like you said, mind blowing, you know, and it was like,
And what a perspective. I
that,
never had that privilege to sit behind him.
it,
I got different views when I was a kid, but I never sat behind him.
okay, and with that said, we weren't supposed to be there, and we were, and he was taking requests, and I screamed out time check from behind the fence, and he did it. He called it out, and they did it, you know, and it was just like watching him do the solo and time check.
Oh my god.
But I did that once, and then later on, I was able to sit. I think it was at the LA Sports Arena. I saw the Police there on Zenyatta Mandata, and the only seats available were behind the drummer, and I sat behind Stewart, and again, it was like it was insane. That you know,
Yeah.
that's when I was just like so in love with just the drums and watching other drummers and seeing how it was done, you know.
And it sounds like your whole life is drums at that point. Even though you're young
And it was.
and, you know, but and you're playing covers and just keeping it going,
Yeah.
you're just consumed by drums.
Yeah, it was just like it was like there was always something happening or there was always someone to go see, you know. It was the same way I saw Bozio. You know, same thing. It
Did
was
you see him with Zappa or Missing Persons?
with Missing Persons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When you had the electronic kit or the
It
Rotos?
was his Rotos.
Oh, the
Rotos.
Rotos. Okay.
It was at
But still,
Ma-
again,
Magic
pretty
Mountain
mind.
or Knott's Berry Farm, some weird new wave night thing they were having, you know, and it was like my buddies and I went. Saw Belson the same way, saw Louis too.
I used to
You
help him
know?
set up his drums. I took
Yeah.
lessons from him
He's
if I got there early enough, and he was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, just
so
again,
musical.
oh, and you get mesmerized by the chops, and then for me anyway, then I kind of grew to the point where I realized the chops were just part of the story, that
Yeah.
there is so much going on musically and the genius of it that it was far beyond chops.
And that's the thing. The people are always like, well, you know, Buddy and Louie and this, and, you know, all these people. And it's like, you know, they all had their thing. They really did. Those players of that time
Yeah.
all had their thing. But Louis, I feel at that, you know, he was always a bit underrated in a sense because of, and then when I saw him in person, it was just like you're saying. We were like, this guy's so musical. The stuff that he's doing and the dynamics that he has.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's serving everything around him.
Beyond the fact that he had the technique in the league of a
everybody did,
Buddy
yeah,
or a
absolutely.
Gene or
On the
any
level,
of the
all on the
greats.
same level.
Yeah,
But
same
was-
top of the drumming world.
Yeah.
So then what is the first big break or change to now have your career really kind of go into overdrive?
Well, like I said, I was heavily into punk rock and stuff at this time, you know, and it was like I started to play with some friends of mine who were a little, you know, into more punk rock and stuff like that. My good friend Tony, he was a guitar player, and then before I knew it, Wasted Youth, the band that I ended up joining, whose brother, crazy enough, was the guitar player Chet, was brother to Lucky, who was the original drummer for the Circle Jerks.
Yeah.
So they asked me to come down. They had lost their drummer, and I went down, and next thing I know, I was playing and I was on the road. This
And this is your first big road
yeah,
gig.
yeah, I was like, I think 19 at that time because I went on the road with them. They did their first tour and we did a whole stage tour and some places were over to I had to sit outside because I wasn't 21. So it was like, so I ended up doing that and that went on for a few years. And after that, um, I did this band Sugar Tooth that got signed to Geffen, during the kind of grunge era, the kind of time that was happening. But I think the real big break for me was when I joined Danzig. And that was the end of 95, or sorry, yeah, the middle of 95 when Chuck had left, Biscuits had left the band, and it was still the original band with Chuck, John, and Glenn. I'm sorry, with Glenn, Erie, John, and Glenn. Chuck had left. And Chuck was one of my favorite drummers ever, and he still is to this day. And I get the call, that they're auditioning drummers, and I was like, oh wow, I was like, that's kind of weird. And,
Almost a dream come true.
yeah, well, yes and no, because it was, Chuck, it would be, but I got the call, and the next thing I know, I went down. I was the last guy to audition, and the next day, I got the call that I got the gig.
Amazing.
So that was my first uh, step into worldwide touring and everything else at that point, and that was kind of it,
Wow. Never looked back.
Yeah.
Were you always playing the same configuration kit? It's always
Yeah.
basic.
It always started, yeah, pretty much. There was a moment when I joined Wasted Youth, which was funny. The first kit that I played were Lucky's drums
Okay.
from the Circle Jerks, which was back then was a 24-15-20.
Oh, big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these old Slingerlands,
Okay.
and that's when I fell in love with big drums. It was like
Okay.
I was like, I love big drum. And of
Were they
course,
single headed or double headed?
those were single.
Okay.
Those were single.
Okay.
They had they had uh they had bottom hoops on them, but he had them off. When I got them, I inherited them with no bottom heads.
Gotcha.
So I would go back and forth. I ended up doing, kind of experimenting both top and bottom, but and just like tonight, normally I'm playing with the Jerks. I'm playing my big Star Maple kit, which is double headed. The last couple of times I came out, I went back to single head.
It's easier for the sound man too. If you like the sound of the
depends.
concert tom,
My
to put the
sound man at
mic.
first,
Does he put the mics on top or in the shell?
No, I do underneath.
Okay.
In fact, this should be done.
Okay.
But that's what I'm doing tonight and on this run.
I like the sound too. I prefer the mic in the concert tom if you go single headed.
Because that's the only way to get that sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's throaty. And it's just got a certain characteristic.
Exactly. It's fast, And,
yes.
but anyways, so yeah, my configuration has always pretty much stayed, one rack, one floor. In Danzig, it was the same. I occasionally would use two floors. Same with Queens. Queens was the same. But I had I started out when I joined Queens, I was one rack, two floors. When I quickly got rid of the second floor because I needed to set up a set of bongos that I would use for a couple of the songs. And
Queens of the Stone Age, when you joined them, that's another big milestone.
Yes,
I mean, an iconic group.
I was in Danzig, for I think 7 years, and then I got the call. It's a crazy long story about how that all came about, like the initial let's get together. But I had been overseas with Queens in a band called Goatsnake. My friend Pete Stahl and Greg Anderson, they were opening for the Queens on R. So I kind of got reacquainted with Josh and at that point because my band prior had played around a bit with Kaya's, so we did kind of know each other. So yeah, but then let's jump ahead to Songs for the Deaf, and they had just finished that record, and Dave had left, and I got a call for the beginning of that run. They were looking for somebody to do it. I was like, I thought I had heard you guys had somebody already, and they were like, no, and the answer was no. They weren't sold on it, and if I could come down that weekend, so I ended up going down, and I played with them on Sunday, and then we were playing Monday night. The first show is a promo shows up in San Francisco.
And how are you learning the material that fast? You knew the tunes?
It was crazy because I was familiar with their older stuff. I always did love their older stuff. That record wasn't even out. Def wasn't even out yet. That was the whole thing. It was just starting to cycle and it hadn't been released and it was going to be released that week coming up. So that they sent me a CD on Friday and they gave me, 3 or 4 songs to learn. But went in on Sunday, we played, and then when they told me that I got the gig, we broke for like an hour, and we came back and we rehearsed for about 8 hours straight
Oh, okay.
next night,
Okay.
and got as much as we could get done.
And you had to set it
And
down.
that was it.
Yeah.
It was 11 and a half years later or so.
What a run.
Yeah, and it was great. Had a great time. It was fun.
And then you're now playing with Zach Sabbath, right? So how did that gig come about?
Well, that
As your
happened.
full circle to your being inspired by Bill Ward.
Absolutely. And it was funny because I'd known Blasco for years, known Zach a bit as well. I was playing at the time with my other band, this band Blast, and we were playing with Goat Snake, this other friends of ours, their record release party, and Blasco was there. And I think like a day or so later after we played, I get a call from Blasco and he's like, "Hey, Zach and I are doing this thing and it's called Zach Sabbath and we're going to be doing Sabbath stuff." And I was kind of like, at first I was like, well, is it Sabbath because they both were with Ozzy together, Blasco and Zach.
Right.
I go, you guys, is it going to be the approach Ozzy took to Sabbath or is this more of a traditional style of Sabbath? And he goes, no, we want to do it in the traditional style, those songs only. And obviously with a bit of a twist, obviously with us doing it. And I was like, oh, dude, that sounds great. I would love to. It sounds, if anything, it's a hell of a good time,
Yeah.
get in a room with
Such great material and great players,
Yeah.
honestly.
So, we got together and we played, and immediately it was just like, it was amazing. It was great. We had a blast. And so Blasco had booked some shows. And like I said, it started out a couple nights at the Viper Room. And before we knew it, we were on tour with Clutch. And it kind of started spreading word of mouth. And then we were on the Aftershock Festival. And then we were on Louder Life Festival. It's like, yeah, it was starting to move, and generate. And we were just like, wow, it's a cover band, but it was.
But this great
But it was
response.
because this great response, but it still had its own kind of thing, which was cool because that's what people were enjoying about it. We were sticking to what it obviously was and what a lot of people still wanted to hear Sabbath doing, which they weren't around doing anything at that point. And
you're playing big Danny Wormer festivals. Those are big festivals that you're referring to on top of everything else. But what about your kit with that? Because I've never seen a Black Sabbath drummer not play double bass that I can remember.
No, I still do the same setup. Just a fake
amazing.
double bass on the floor tom,
But keep it down to the basics of 4 or 5 piece kit.
I've always managed to make. It's crazy because a lot of my friends in text will tell me like, your setup is like it could be so much easier if you set up this way, this that. It's like I've always kind of liked to kind of push myself in a way like not make it a little difficult at times to work. I like to work, and I like to feel a certain way, but I also I like the look of how a single tom mounted on a kick drum looks. I like that high, thing. It's like, it feels more natural to me because the snare and the tom are directly behind and in front of one another.
Right. Because like Bonham had it on the snare stand on some of his.
And I did that too because a lot of people weren't doing. Remember when everybody got away from, they wanted the Virgin kick drum. They didn't want to put.
Yes.
And so when I was with, DW back then, they weren't real big on mounting on the kick anymore. So I did that, but I never quite, it wasn't ever that comfortable for me. It was a little bit off to me all the time, it always felt like it was like this far. When you're up on the rack, it's right here,
Yeah.
I'm much more comfortable for me. But anyways, I stuck to that.
Even with Sabbath. Yeah. Amazing.
With that.
Wow.
It's like, it's what I'm just most comfortable doing.
And you're playing Tama?
Yeah, I'm back with Tama, which I'm super stoked on. It was like I left for a little while and then I came back over the last, I think after the pandemic. But I've always, I grew up, I was always throughout my, growing up, I'm still am. I love collecting and buying drums. Like, I have an old Camco Oaklawn kit I still have, one of my first early ones. I had a Fives kit. I tried them all, but I always loved the look and the stance of Tama drums back then.
Oh, okay.
I loved Stan Lynch's setup back then. He was
Oh, yeah.
his style.
And he had the big
Yeah,
4 or 5 piece
that's
kit.
right.
That's right.
And it's like
Yeah.
it just looked really cool, and I love that's why my Star Maple kit, I designed it on the with the intentions of, Stan's kit back then, his Maple Superstar kit, and yeah, obviously Bonham's Maple,
Mhm.
Thurman
And you're
Ross.
playing a single-headed rack,
With that kit, I have both. With the Maple Star Maple, I have both.
and you just switch between whether it's
switch,
double or
yeah,
single? Because I
depending
saw downstairs you had a single tonight.
Here I'm playing tonight. I'm on this run. I'm playing my Imperial Stars, Black
Okay.
Imperial Stars.
Okay,
So
and the other
these are
kit you're referring to, you have single and double. Right, right. And the floor tom's double-headed, right,
yeah,
typically?
but I'm using it single headed right now.
Oh, tonight's
So
single-headed?
yeah,
And what about snare drum?
tonight I'm playing with. Well, most of the time I'm using uh an aluminum 14x8 Q snare that Jeremy
Deep,
made me
very deep. Yeah.
years ago, because Jeremy was my tech in Queens before he started Q drums and before he
Oh, okay.
passed away, rest in peace. He was my tech. And when he started his company, early on, he made me the snare I have, which without a doubt, I don't know what it is. Even he at times was like, you beat this drum out of round. It's just, and it just still sounds amazing. And my sound man to this day, and all the bands I play with, every sound man's like, I love that snare. It's just, there's something about it. I'm like, in fact, Jay Weinberg was just out at Tim Armstrong's studio in LA where I have a kit set up. I have a couple kits there that I set up because I work with him quite a bit. I had that kit up, and Jay ended up using that same snare. He was like, "This snare is amazing. Can I use it?" I'm like, "Yeah, have at it, man,"
Wow.
And it's just, it's a normal 8x14, and I usually run it with a clear black dot. Um, Tonight I have an Emperor X on. I ran out of clears, but either way, whatever I throw on it, it sets up and it sounds incredible. And it really does sit in that place where it's got a lot of crack, but still got that warmth and depth. And it's weirdly different than most metal drums I've ever had and play.
And what's it made out of?
It's aluminum.
It's aluminum?
It's raw aluminum. It's not polished or anything. It's just kind of raw. Um, it's seamed. He put it together and it's nothing special, but
It just sounds special.
yeah, it's amazing. I love it. But I go between that and I have an old Coliseum, a Ludwig Coliseum, which I
Okay,
love.
also deep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same
You
dimension.
don't see many Coliseums, but
It's got the old Ludwig, the old crazy die-cast hoop they have.
Oh,
Have it.
sure. Okay.
I love it, man. It's like, but then with my Thomas snares, I have a 6.5x14 Mastercraft, an original super mahogany that I have from an original kit that I bought from some guy. Um, I've got a few Imperial Stars. I have a few Superstars. Um, I got a few of my Q drums and stuff that Jeremy had built me, Vista lights and stuff.
And you just choose based on the live setting or the studio setting, which one you wanna
Studio settings,
play.
yeah, but live, I strictly just play my Thomas. I love, Sam and everybody over there at Tom are amazing.
Yeah, Sam's
and,
great.
and they're always super cool with me when I want to play the vintage, bring out the old ones. They're like, of course, it's like, because I took out my Superstars on the last run, which were awesome. But I stick to the same dimensions. Luckily enough, I have 26, 15, 20 in all my kits. So even the old ones, I was lucky enough to find those. So
Okay.
the Imperial Stars tonight are the same setup.
And you were gonna I interrupted earlier, I didn't mean to. You were gonna talk about that setup tonight for a second. You were giving some context to how it's set up, and we were talking about so
It's a
take us through that.
it's a 26x14 kick. Tom mounted on the bass drum,
Mhm.
15x11 concert tom
Okay.
for my rack, and my floor is a 20x18, which with no bottom head on it right now.
Okay.
I'm running all ebony pinstripes, which sound amazing.
Okay.
I love them.
And they look cool too.
They look great, and they just sound cool.
Yeah.
They, yeah, they look even cooler. But I'm running my kick drum wide open, nothing in it,
26 wide open.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
And the
funny.
sound man's not going crazy, and
First
you
he was even sick because my sound man's amazing. He does both us descendants, and he loves my maple kit, my superstar, which is big. But I told him, I said, there's something different about the Imperial Stars. The wood is different, much different than the maple birch, and but trust me when I tell you that you're gonna get what you think you're not going to get out of these drums once they're mic'd. They may sound weird just out here with nothing on them, but and sure enough, he was like, wow. He's like, I never would have thought that he'd be going for the wide open kick, especially 26. And it's like, it just, for some reason, those drums at that time, and they were workhorses. The Imperial Stars were everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody played them, and
True.
and especially big rock drummers were playing
Yeah.
on. And
Yeah.
they, surprisingly, man, they're really, really, they're they're very punchy for being a wide open kick
And that big.
and
You don't think of 26 and
it's
punchy,
yeah,
right? So that's amazing.
and it's funny because I'd use them in the studio, my superstars and stuff like that, and same thing. A lot of the younger engineers I've been working with have never even come across anything like that. And when they hear those drums like that, they're like, "Whoa!" Why? They're blown away. And so I mean, as they can't be used for everything.
Right, right.
For this,
For this music, for
absolutely,
this, and
even for the Sabbath, with Zach, did the Zach Sabbath stuff.
the
So Ward did.
right. He had big
Ward had
drums.
nothing
That's
in
true.
them, and they were concert
And they were big.
times and big and really mixed up sizes. What Ward would do, and
And when I look at your cymbals, it looked like, is that an Earthride?
I have an Earthride, which I love. This is bigger. This is a 24 heavy power ride.
Wow.
So it even has a bit more. It's got a bit more sustain and actually projection.
Not as dry as an Earthride.
Not as dry.
Okay.
Correct.
Interesting. It looks so. I mean, I just
man.
remember it is,
It's
and I remember how those sounded. I didn't play your cymbal. I just looked at it, but an image of the sound came to me. I'm like, I gotta ask Joey about this. This is
It's a
badass.
beast. And Kirsten, when she sent it to me ages ago, um, I was trying to get with it, trying to find it. They had discontinued the orchestral rides. Those are at that point. I used to use the orchestral 24, which was a brilliant. It was a really beautiful sounding cymbal, and it still had a crash on it, and it had a bell,
Okay.
a nice bell on it.
Okay.
But they discontinued them, so I was looking for a replacement, and I ended up going back then with Queen stuff. I ended up going with the 24K Lite. They just come out with the K Lite, which I still love.
Okay.
And I use for Zach. That's what I use for Zach Sabbath is cause it's got a nice wash.
Okay.
But when I got the Circle Jerks gig, I needed something fast and pingy, and I needed something with a bell.
Okay.
But I also needed something bigger because of the drum sizes that I play and stuff.
Right. And the volume.
I was playing with 22s instead of 20. That I have a ping ride and I have an old K Dark ride it's really cutting and awesome, but it's just not loud enough, over this kind of stuff.
Sure,
So anyways,
sure.
I was going through my stuff and I found the heavy bell, and it's like I say, the heavy bell Z. It's not the mega bell. It's just a regular
Right,
heavy power ride.
Even though that bell on it is incredible.
And it is. It's cutting and it's great. So I found it and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect, because I could get the speed that I need off it for the straight,
Yeah.
But I hit her up and I'm like, Kirsten, I was like, of course I only had one. I go, is there any of these anywhere still available? And she's like, those things are so long gone. And she's like, if you find one, you better grab it. And I'm like, okay. She's like, I'll keep my eye out. But apparently, I guess Randy Castillo played them. Eric Singer played them. They were kind of big at that time. I even think Puffy played them. I think Borden played them too.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's like I said, it's like, it weighs a ton, but it's amazing. And it really is like, it's a very interesting symbol.
It is.
Every drummer who's not familiar with it that I've come across and they've seen it or heard it, like, they're like, what is that thing?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's true.
And 24, I guess, is it's a little bit harder to find. 22s are kind of around, but the 24 is the one that's a little bit harder to find.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have it.
Amazing. Awesome. And we talk about the perfect fit for instruments and our world, drums and cymbals for the band, for the music.
100%.
Like there's the
100%, man.
blueprint of like, if you had designed the cymbal that you needed, there it was.
Absolutely.
That's what that to me is what makes it so awesome.
And
is
that was the thing.
It's because it's a very unique blend of characteristics to
Yeah.
get to what you need for this
That's
style.
right. Because I don't need that super wash for this. It's very distinct and precise on the riding.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of this. So
And you have a crash ride
I
on
just yeah, my
looked like a
cymbals
K
are
crash ride.
composed with all my with either the Bronx or either with Zach or pretty much the same, other than the ride. The For the circle jerks, the heavy 24 power ride comes in. With Zach in the Bronx, I use the same 24K light, but I use 15-inch hats. I use an Avitas on top, and I use a new beat on the bottom.
Oh, interesting.
So a little more projection.
Okay.
Not as soft with the two Avitas.
Right,
the old ones.
right.
But I like it because it's dark enough. It gives it that old kind of vintagey sound, but it's
Yeah.
like I say, it gives me that chick, that loud enough chick. And then I normally use a 19 dark K thin over here, which is awesome. But
Big cymbal, but thin. You would think it
yeah,
would just get shredded.
and that's the thing is this because of the speed and stuff like that. I mean, that's the thing is like it's funny. A lot of people are like, "Man, you bash through something like," but it's not. I think there is a little bit of it. I would hope to think there's a little bit of technique in still what I'm doing. You
Sure,
know
of
what I mean?
course.
It's like
No,
it looks one way, but I can manage to do that. I've used 19s, either the old Zildjian medium. I used to use the A, which was
Okay.
great.
Sure.
The Bronx, I'll go between either a Sweet 19 or a 2019 over here. But for Zach and for the circle jerks, this time around I'm using a Zildjian thin A. 'Cause she was out of the K's right now. They didn't have any. But I always stick with the 21 Dark K Crash. Brilliant. Over here. I use it for everything. That's my go-to, no matter what. That thing has to be on my set. And it's just such a to me,
Because you'll ride it and
I'll
you'll
ride
crack
and I'll
it.
crash it, and it's just got that full. I mean, the brilliance at that time when they were big, Brazilian in like the 80s and like I loved the brilliance. I know Joey Kramer used to use brilliance, and Lucky actually he used brilliant. There was something about the sound of those, and that's kind of the only one that they do now in the crash that's still
Yeah.
brilliant.
Mhm.
And it's real explosive, and it's like, but it's a K, so it's
Right.
weirdly dark.
Right.
It's not
Right.
that really overly bright thing. So, but yeah, that's my go-to. That's my favorite cymbal of all time.
And sticks?
Okay, so normally I use the Vader Rock. I've
Okay.
used the Vader Rock for years.
Okay.
But with I'm sorry, with the circle jerks, I needed something a hair shorter because it's faster. A lot of stuff kind of going on. So I went to the XD Rock, which is Vader XD Rock. Same stick, pretty much the same in weight, but I think it's like maybe a half an inch shorter.
Okay.
And it makes a huge difference because the balance of it becomes slightly different.
Wow.
But
Okay.
it's faster on the tip still, in the
Wood
end.
tip?
All wood tip.
Oh,
Yeah, I stick
sure.
to wood tip.
But see the nuances. Isn't that the awesome thing about our instrument is that, half an inch difference in the
Totally.
length of a stick.
Yeah.
And it's
funny,
like
I tried to use my rocks the other night because I'm running low, and it just I was a little bit hung up, and sometimes like slightly under a cymbal I noticed, and it was just because of that little bit of
yeah, it makes such a
and
difference.
it's because of and it's not like I'm not familiar with the stick. It's the speed of the songs that it's going. You know
Right.
what I mean? And
Right.
the movements are slightly different.
Right.
So I was like, man, because I was actually going like, maybe I'll just go back to the rock for this. But I was like, nah,
You got it.
these are for a reason. It's like they work for a reason. So, but it's a great stick. I love it.
So all these years of playing, going from falling in love with the drums to having an incredible career and inspiring generations of drummers through your career, what advice do you have for drummers at any stage, but especially starting out and they're exposed to social media? Everybody looks like they're further ahead than the next person when a lot of it isn't even real. But here you are, you've lived it, you're living it. What's your advice?
I think for the most, anytime I've been asked this, I try to, you know, ultimately keep it about what my experience, obviously. And obviously, it doesn't work for everybody, like I've said before. But the one thing that does, I think, apply to each and every one of us is to love what you're doing, and stay true to who you are and know what you're capable of doing, and being okay. Honestly, I've always said I'm okay with knowing the things that I can't do either,
Or don't want to do.
or don't want to do.
Meaning if a gig comes along and, and it's not right for you, you'll pass
That's
to
right.
find
And
the gig that
that's
is.
100%. And that is the first thing that I've always, you know, I can actually say I prided myself on. There are some things I knew right out the gate. I could never do this, or I don't want to do this. And I'm not, I'm going to, and it's like I say, that doesn't always necessarily mean that that's a right thing to do for some, but, you know, know your abilities, and also at the same time not be afraid to take those challenges, not to be afraid to take that step to um open another door, because as you know, there's always going to be something for one of us to do as a player. There's always something, and I just say, I couldn't be more adamant about just being true to who you are. And like I
That's been
said,
your North Star.
what's that?
That's been your North Star.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is stay
And
know who
just
you are, know what you love,
know who you are,
stay true to it.
know what you love. And, my I said I just have always said, being respectful of others as well. When you're in a room with somebody, and you're working with other people, know that it's not always just about you, and know that you're part of something, of a group of people that are trying to, most of the time, and that's not always true, but most of the time trying to do something creatively well, and know that you can all be proud of something, and that's what I try to do. I try to know what I'm being asked to know, um, show up on time. It's like,
Right.
put
Be the utmost professional. Like,
yeah,
be very aware of
of
that there is
course,
professional conduct
that's right, because
that you have to adhere to if you're at a very high level.
and the thing is if it might not be with that group of people that you're with that understand or see that, but somebody out here is going to understand and see that, and say, hey, I love what you do. And that's what has happened to me in my career. I just always try to do the best I can, and be prepared and ready to roll. And my journey has continued on and on that way, you know. And I'm grateful for it, because I love music. First and foremost, I love music, and I want to I want to do it as long as I can.
Man, well, we're glad you are. You've inspired generations of drummers. Thank you today for being a
Thank you.
part of the Modern Drummer Podcast.
Thank you.
Joey Castillo, David Frangioni, thank you. Thank you, Modern Drummer. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Modern Drummer. Everybody else.
And we'll see you guys very soon. Be well.
Cool.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you, my man.